Welcome to Decades of Heistery, where we cover safecrackers and bank heists from 1926 up until U.S. involvement in World War II. It is time to unveil the indiscriminate and vicious Terrill Kimes gang under its official moniker for the first time here in April 1927. Since they were so violent, reactionary, and aggressive, it might be best to ease into the month with a visit to Indiana to check in with some slightly more clever and less physical yeggs. Recall, yeg is a term typically meaning safecracker, though we've seen it used for jewelry thieves and even in general for robbers. For our purposes, yeg will mean safecracker. So we'll start off by going to Indiana. Appropriately, we start with the Indianapolis Times and its April 4, 1927 front page, titled "Yeggs Loot State Bank, Burn Vault." The story is subtitled, "Robbers Escape with 50 Deposit Boxes at Browns Valley." It's subtitled, "Unable to Open Safe," and a fourth title, "Cut Telephone Cables Isolating Business Section." We head to Browns Valley, Indiana, where we learn that cashier Edgar Pitts arrived at work at the Browns Valley State Bank only to discover the remnants of the heist. And that included a hole cut in the front door. It looks as though 4 yeggs successfully hauled away 50 safe deposit boxes. But it appeared that they unsuccessfully attempted to burn their way into the vault to get at the money by burning a hole in the vault door with the proverbial acetylene torch. We've discussed what are known as burners or safecrackers who use acetylene torches in previous episodes. They did manage to damage the time lock, which actually prevented bank officials from being able to open the vault door. Sheriff Thomas W. Rice of Crawfordsville, Indiana, was called in and discovered but one clue. A Forrest Michaels, quote, a local youth, end quote, told Sheriff Rice that he saw a Hudson coach parked near the bank at about 2 a.m. He did not get a license number on what he said appeared to be an empty vehicle. The value of the contents of the safe deposit boxes was, of course, unknown and would have to wait confirmation from the individual box renters. Sadly, it was assumed that many of the area folks kept Liberty bonds and, of course, valuable papers in those boxes like we would do today. The perpetrators had cut the telephone lines, which ended up leaving the area business district without use of telephone and, in a sense, isolated. The cashier Pitts stated that the loss was, quote, completely covered by insurance, end quote, which I find strange since no money was taken and there was no way to prove what was in the boxes, and typically safe deposit boxes are not covered by that insurance. There was an inset titled "Bandits Work Nights Now" that touted successes of the vigilante committees that we've discussed numerous times in the past. A Miss Forba McDaniel, secretary of the Indiana Bankers Association, noted that Montgomery County had organized against daylight holdups, but not night ones. And she added that the Browns Valley State Bank did not have an alarm. Well, the Times ran a story on April 23, 1927, titled "Yeggs Get $7,200 at State Bank." The heist took place early on Friday, April 22nd, at the State Bank at Jolietsville. They got away with $2,200 in cash and about $5,000 in securities. This sounds somewhat familiar to the Browns Valley job. The front door lock was broken, allowing entry. It had been left open and was even noticed by a passerby. An acetylene torch had been brought and for some reason left behind. And like the Browns Valley job, telephone wires were cut, thereby affecting the alarm. Somehow, no one heard what was later termed an explosion that damaged and opened the safe. Now, one difference, and this is perhaps because the crooks successfully got into the vault, was that the safe deposit boxes were left unmolested. Bank President W.L. Newcomer noted that insurance covered all the losses in that case. So perhaps the Browns Valley crew had upped their game? Is this the same crew? Browns Valley and Jolietsville are about 55 miles or so apart, so distance definitely wouldn't have been an issue. We'll follow up as more information becomes available. Now we will extract information from the Douglas Daily Dispatch, the Evening Star, the New Britain Daily Herald, and the Brownsville Herald. In total, 12 editions were dedicated to the recent mayhem of the Texas Panhandle, exacerbated by the presence of two well-known and vicious gangs. First up, the Douglas Daily Dispatch from April 1, 1927, as we head to Pampa, Texas, an oil town with a population of around 10,000 or so. It was located around 70 miles northeast of Amarillo. The story starts with 5, quote, natty bank robbers, end quote, who were also described as demonstrating gentility. Right from the start, this does not sound like Terrill or Kimes. This took place at the Pampa First National Bank and netted the robbery combine $25,000. A trio entered the bank with revolvers drawn. They came in from 3 different doors, which certainly would have been a very dramatic entrance. One remained at the front door, while the other 2 herded employees, including D.L. Vickers, who was a cashier, and A.V. Hendrick, who was a teller, along with customers, into the rear of the building. One of the robbers carried a cement sack that he allegedly picked up off of the sidewalk. That robber was addressed by the other 2 as Whitey. Whitey held the sack open while another robber, known as Slim, dumped bundles of currency into it. Supposedly, Whitey and Slim held conversation about various topics while they worked loading up the sack. They passed on the silver and other coinage, probably due to weight, although they may have just wanted the bigger denominations from this haul. Customers continued to enter the bank, and as they did, they were met by the man who was guarding the front door, who then led them to join the growing mob of prisoners in the back. In walks J.E. Murphy, a Pampa merchant, who came in with a sack containing $11,000, which he intended to deposit. One of the robbers, quote, politely relieved him of the heavy sack, end quote, and inquired if the money was insured. Murphy replied that it was not, and the robber handed the sack back, noting that he couldn't take it in that case. Meanwhile, outside and a few doors down from the bank was a car with its engine running, guarded by 2 men. The robbers inside finished up and ordered the customers and prisoners, which had blossomed to 25, into the vault. Then one of the robbers tossed a screwdriver into the vault and instructed them on how to use it to open the door from the inside. Then the trio apparently waltzed from the bank, got into the waiting car, and left. The vehicle headed, quote, across the plains toward Clarendon, end quote, and were assumed to have been traversing some large ranch. Well, the cashier indeed employed the instructions and led that gaggle out of the vault. Total time from the dramatic entrance to the leisurely waltz out of the bank took only 23 minutes. Now, this was the second bank robbery in West Texas in the last couple of days. We covered the other, that was the Ovalo, Texas heist in the March Quick Hitters video. Now let's add the Ovalo robbery, this recent Pampa caper, along with the continual Borger, Texas violence to see if we can make some connections. Well, the Evening Star ran an April 2nd, 1927 front page story titled Rangers Take Law to Oil Boomtown. It was subtitled Texas Panhandle District Quiet After Slaying of 2 Deputy Sheriffs. We'll head to the notorious oil boomtown of Borger, Texas, which we've covered in several recent episodes. We see that the Texas Rangers were sent to settle things in the area, and particularly to Stinnett, which was 15 miles west of Borger. They were in search of 3 suspects involved in the murder of 2 deputy sheriffs. Deputies Pat Kenyon and A.L. Terry were shot and killed near Wittenberg, Texas on April 1st. Apparently, Kenyon and Terry had stopped a vehicle as part of a search for the 5 bandits who'd robbed the Pampa Bank. The officers weren't even able to return fire and were shot down in what was essentially an ambush. Well, a Henry Field was driving by. He was driving a wedding party and found the automobile and then located the officers' bodies nearby the car, as well as a pistol that had been inadvertently left behind by one of the killers. Not long after that, a Hugh Walker and an Ed Bailey were arrested at nearby homes and jailed in Stinnett. Hugh's brother, known as Whitey, was also arrested and was indeed a suspect in the Pampa heist. Whitey Walker was a member of a notorious Oklahoma gang, the Cotton Top Walker Gang, which hailed from the Cherokee Hills. So it sounds like that's 3 of the 5 down, so police were able to focus their search on one Ray Terrill and Matthew Kimes, allegedly identified as leaders in the Pampa robbery, and most likely the 2 who guarded the getaway car during the Pampa heist. Due to their propensity for handling firearms and their suspected whereabouts, they were also suspects in the slayings of officers Kenyon and Terry. Back to the killing of Kenyon and Terry for a moment. Around 8:15 a.m. on the day of the killing, a woman allegedly awoke due to gunfire. Based on hearing different voices, she claimed there were, quote, at least 4 men in the party, end quote. Well, police were able to trace a blue and black sedan to a farmhouse and garage owned by a local farmer named W.E. Archer. That farm happened to be located between Pampa and Borger. It seems like the gang took over the place and hid there from around noon till about dusk, at which point they locked the farmer and his sister in a closet and left. Now back to Borger for a moment. Borger had exploded in growth, adding, quote, gambling halls and dives, end quote. Accompanying the new businesses were numerous slayings. A woman was recently shot to death during the robbery of a filling station. Borger had, quote, vice in all its forms, end quote. And the, quote, riffraff, end quote, from around the country were attracted to the easy money potential and what amounted to safety from the law. The Rangers had been called out by Borger residents due to the general worsening conditions there, but also to the recent killing. And the governor, Dan Moody, sent 10 of the, quote, cowboy peace officers, end quote, with the goal being to, quote, remain until the lawless unconditionally surrender, end quote. Among those sent were the famous Captain Tom Hickman and Frank Hammer. Both of them were noted in previous episodes, with Hickman being highlighted for his allegedly shooting and killing 2 robbers with 1 shot. Along with Hickman and Hammer were privates Aldrich, Molesworth, Cummings, Davis, McCoy, and Taylor. Quote, they came without display, clad in cowboy attire, their 6 shooters and stars, their insignia of authority, end quote. In one of the earliest times in print, quote, the Terrill Kimes gang, end quote, was noted as the reason for their arrival. Ray Terrill had run with Al Spenser and had at least 19 warrants out, ranging from train robbery to post office robbery and, of course, bank robbery. And he was a recent escapee from Missouri authorities. Even Terrill's wife was involved, as she'd been arrested in Oklahoma City with a huge haul of jewelry that had allegedly been stolen from a Texas store. Matt Kimes, covered in a handful of videos in the past, was a notorious bank robber and murderer who was quick to fire. He was also a recent escaped convict. Right below that story was another titled Mob Fear Expelled. It was subtitled Crowd in Front of Jail at Stinnett Dispersed. So let's head to Stinnett, Texas, where we see a potential lynching had simmered down. It looks like police were successful in dispersing a mob which intended on removing the Walker brothers and Ed Bailey from their cells. The crowd was dispersed indeed, but only because Borger officers reinforced the Stinnett ones, essentially forming a skirmish line around the jail. The Brownsville Herald's April 2nd edition ran a headline, "Officers Close In on Borger Bandits," in its customary 500 size font. The story title was smaller in size but way more informative, titled "Believe Bandit is Hiding in River Breaks." The story tells us that all officers in Borger, Texas were closing in on a section of the Canadian River Breaks north of Borger. A large sedan, identified as the one used by the Pampa bank robbery crew, had been located. 2 of its tires were flat and lugs had been removed, suggesting that the drivers were going to change them out. However, it appears that something frightened them away. Now, while all that's going on, back in Stinnett, efforts were being made to get Hugh Walker, Whitey Walker, and Ed Bailey, being held for murder, bank robbery, and other crimes, to get them out on bond. Not surprisingly, it was denied, though 3 attorneys were hightailing it from Amarillo, Texas, to obtain a speedy habeas corpus release for these men. The other 2 of the quintet, however, made an April 4, 1927 headline in the Brownsville Herald, titled "Bandits Again Elude Pursuit." It was subtitled "Kimes and Terrill Escape from Town as Officers Enter." So this actually takes us back to Borger, where the manhunt was still on in the Canadian River Breaks. We learned that police had invaded a 2-room shack in Signal Hill, where Kimes and Terrill were reported to be hiding. They found a pair of bloody trousers that police assumed were worn by Terrill on the same night Officer Coke Buchanan was murdered. We covered that story in the March 1927 follow-ups video. It seems that the report was correct that Terrill was indeed shot in the leg during that murder, though obviously he escaped. Well, a local Spring Hill resident told police that the 2 inhabitants had flown from the shack minutes before police arrived. That witness saw a large coupe pulling out, another man emerging from the shack, only to launch himself into the car before the car sped away. Police had raided a farm 2 miles away and ended up arresting a man who had a large liquor still in the works. And it makes you wonder if that didn't actually alert Terrill and Kimes. Back to Stinnett, Texas, where on April 6th we see Hugh and Whitey Walker, along with Ed Bailey, being released on $15,000 bond each in connection with the murder of Kenyon and Terry. However, it was procedural, as they were immediately rearrested on warrants for their involvement in the Pampa bank heist. And just for kicks, right under this story from the Brownsville Herald, we see another one titled "Claim Fraud in Borger Election." It seems that 10 men had been allegedly involved in the re-election of the Borger mayor, John R. Miller, and his entire administration. All 10 were actually being bonded out from Stinnett with a promise to appear before the grand jury. I would love to be able to time travel back to Borger, Texas in 1927. An April 8, 1927 Brownsville Herald story titled "Fort Worth Police Watch for Bandits." They were keeping their eyes peeled for none other than Ray Terrill, Matt Kimes, and an unidentified woman. The Plainview, Texas Chief of Police H.S. Murray had telegrammed the Fort Worth police that a sedan with 3 occupants was headed their way. He gave their license number and a general description of the occupants. So what does all this mean? The Cotton Top Walker Gang leadership was still in jail in Stinnett, Texas. Terrill and Kimes were on the lam and heading east toward Dallas. And Borger, Texas needed a major cleanup. And for the latter, we turn to the New Britain Daily Herald and its colorful story titled "Painted Ladies and Crooks Are Ousted." It's subtitled "Texas Rangers in Characteristic Cleanup of Oil Boomtown."
So it sounds as though the Texas Rangers instigated, quote, the exodus of painted women and gamblers, end quote, in order to clean up the panhandle of Texas. A large raid of what they were calling undesirables resulted in the arrest of nearly 270 people who were subsequently ordered to leave, quote, right now, end quote. It seemed that the highways leading out of town were populated with women and gamblers on foot, and that the town's party scene had even gone dark. Apparently, it was difficult to even find a bootlegger. And while 3 of the 5 most notorious were being held, the Terrill Kimes gang leadership was still free. Well, follow-ups to come most likely on the Indiana Yegs, but we have definitely not heard the last of the Terrill Kimes gang. With that, we are on to May of 1927.
For now, I want to thank you for spending your time with Decades of History. Till next time.